Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie The Mummy in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called The Mummy. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, and so let's start the video. The Mummy is a 1999 American action-adventure film written and directed by Sommers, starring Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, and Arnold Vosloo in the title role as the reanimated mummy. It is a remake of the 1932 film of the same name and part of the larger Universal Monsters franchise. The film follows adventurer and treasure hunter Rick O'Connell as he travels to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, with librarian Evelyn Carnahan and her older brother Jonathan, where they accidentally awaken Imhotep, a cursed high priest with supernatural powers. Development took years, with multiple screenplays and directors attached. In 1997, Sommers successfully pitched his version of a more adventurous and romantic take on the source material. Filming took place in Morocco and the United Kingdom. The crew endured dehydration, sandstorms, and snakes, shooting on location in the Sahara Desert. Industrial Light and Magic provided many of the visual effects, blending live-action footage and computer-generated imagery to create the titular monster. Jerry Goldsmith composed the orchestral score. The Mummy was theatrically released on May 7, 1999 by Universal Pictures. The film received mixed critical reviews and positive audience reaction and grossed $418.1 million worldwide against a production budget of $80 million, becoming the sixth highest grossing film of 1999. The film started a new franchise with two direct sequels, The Mummy Returns 2001 and The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor 2008, and various spin-offs such as an animated series and the prequel The Scorpion King 2002, which led to sequels of its own. In 2017, an attempt was made to start another Universal Monsters franchise with The Mummy starring Tom Cruise. Plot: in Thebes, Egypt, 1290 BC, the high priest Imhotep has an affair with Pharaoh Seti for his mistress, Anck-su-namun. The pair kill the pharaoh after he discovers the affair. When the pharaoh's bodyguards, the Medjai, arrive, Anck-su-namun commits suicide while Imhotep flees. Imhotep and his priests steal her corpse and travel to Hamunaptra, the city of the dead, to conduct a ritual to resurrect her, but are halted by the Medjai. As punishment, Imhotep's priests are mummified alive, while Imhotep himself is cursed and buried alive with flesh-eating scarabs. The Medjai are sworn to prevent Imhotep's return, as his resurrection would grant him untold power. In 1926 AD Cairo, Jonathan Carnahan presents his sister Evelyn, a librarian and aspiring Egyptologist working for museum curator Dr. Terence Bay, with an intricate box and map that lead to Hamunaptra, the existence of which is now considered a myth, along with the treasures believed to reside there. Jonathan reveals he stole the box from American adventurer and treasure hunter Rick O'Connell, who discovered the city while in the French Foreign Legion. Evelyn bargains with corrupt prison warden Gad Hassan to free an incarcerated Rick, in exchange for the American leading them to Hamunaptra, where she hopes to find the Golden Book of Amun-Ra. The group soon finds themselves competing with another expedition, guided by Rick's cowardly fellow former legionnaire Benny Gabor. They are repeatedly attacked by Medjai, whose leader Ardeth Bey warns them to leave. Ignoring Bey's warnings, the two expeditions continue to dig through the ruins, resulting in numerous fatalities that include Hassan being killed by a scarab he inadvertently releases. Both expeditions come into conflict over a statue which is believed to hold the Golden Book. Within the statue, however, the competing expeditions come across the Book of the Dead as well as 5 canopic jars, while Evelyn, Rick, and Jonathan accidentally discover Imhotep's mummified remains. That night, Evelyn steals the Book of the Dead from the rival camp, accidentally awakening the mummified Imhotep when she reads scripture contained within. Following a confrontation with the now resurrected Imhotep as well as the Magi, the expeditions flee back to Cairo. Realizing Benny can speak Hebrew, Imhotep spares his life to serve as a translator in exchange for treasure. Imhotep follows the expeditions back to Cairo and unleashes the biblical plagues of Egypt. Those who discovered the canopic jars are hunted and killed by Imhotep, restoring his human form and strengthening his power. Hoping to find answers at the museum, the survivors instead find Ardith being hosted by Dr. Bey, a fellow Medji. The group concludes that Imhotep's aim is to resurrect Ankh-Sunamun using Evelyn as a human sacrifice, and that the only way to stop him is to return to Hamunaptra, find the Book of Amun-Ra. The group are soon cornered by Imhotep and a now enslaved city populace, which results in Evelyn's capture while Dr. Bey sacrifices himself to allow the others to escape. The remaining three convince Rick's old friend, RAF Captain Winston Havelock, to fly them to Hamunaptra. Imhotep conjures a magical sandstorm, crashing their plane and killing Havelock. After reaching the city on foot, Rick and Jonathan find the Book of Amun-Ra, while Ardeth is overwhelmed fighting Imhotep's resurrected servants. Jonathan and Rick reach the ritual chamber, where Rick frees Evelyn, and Jonathan uses the book to control the resurrected servants, leading to the death of a partially resurrected Ankh-Sunamun. Evelyn then uses the book to make Imhotep mortal, allowing Rick to fatally stab him. Imhotep's human body instantly decomposes back to its mummified form as it sinks into a pool of liquid. Benny, who has begun pilfering gold treasure from Hamunaptra, inadvertently triggers a booby trap, causing the city to begin collapsing. Rick, Evie, and Jonathan escape while Benny is buried inside and devoured by scarabs. Outside, the group discover Ardeth survived, and he bids them farewell as they depart, unknowingly with some of Benny's plundered loot. Production. Development. In the late 1980s, the producers James Jacks and Sean Daniel decided to update the original 1932 Mummy film for the modern era. Universal gave them the go-ahead, but only if they kept the budget around $10 million. Jacks remembers that the studio essentially wanted a low-budget horror franchise. In 1987, George A. Romero wrote a film treatment and was attached to direct. Screenwriter Abby Bernstein recalled that Universal wanted an unstoppable mummy akin to the Terminator. Bernstein's story took place in the present. Scientists inadvertently bring a mummy to life, who wants to use an ancient device to destroy all life on Earth. The mummy had no more social interaction than the Tyrannosaurus did in Jurassic Park, Bernstein recalled. Romero drifted away from the project and the script was abandoned. Next, Jacks and Daniel recruited horror filmmaker, writer Clive Barker to direct after his success with Hellraiser. Barker's 1990 treatment and a successive 1991 screenplay by Mick Garris were dark and violent, with the story revolving around an art museum that rebuilds an entire Egyptian tomb in Beverly Hills. Jacks recalls that Barker's take was dark, sexual, and filled with mysticism, and that it would have been a great low-budget movie. Barker recalled the concept was too weird for the studio and that his vision treated the mummy as a jumping-off point for the film instead of the central character. The studio considered the film being too perverted to be made. Alan Ormsby, unaware of previous efforts to launch the film, was brought on next. He pitched a more straightforward update to the 1932 film, again focusing on the mummy as a relentless Terminator-like character. Joe Dante was attached as director, increasing the budget for his idea of Daniel Day-Lewis as a brooding mummy. This version's draft was later rewritten by John Sayles. It was set in contemporary times and focused on reincarnation with elements of a love story. It came close to being made, with some elements like the flesh-eating scarabs making it to the final product, but Universal balked at the higher price tag. Romero returned to the project 7 years later in 1994 with a vision of a zombie-style horror film similar to Night of the Living Dead, but which also relied heavily upon elements of tragic romance and ambivalence of identity. Romero completed a draft in October 1994, co-written with Ormsby and Sayles, that revolved around a female archaeologist named Helen Grover and her discovery of the tomb of Imhotep, an Egyptian general who lived in the time of Ramesses II. Unfolding in a nameless American city in modern times, events are set into motion when Imhotep inadvertently awakens as a result of his body having been exposed to rays from an MRI scan in a high-tech forensic archaeology lab. Helen finds herself drawn into a tentative relationship with Imhotep while also experiencing clairvoyant flashbacks to a previous life in the 19th dynasty of Egypt as a priestess of Isis. Summoning mystical powers through incantation, Imhotep later resurrects the mummy of Charis, a loyal slave. Charis embarks on a vengeful rampage against the grave robbers of his tomb. Romero's script was considered too dark and violent by Jacques in the studio, who wanted a more accessible picture. Romero was unable to extricate himself from another contract he had in negotiation with MGM, and so his involvement with the film was severed, and the development of an entirely new script was commissioned. Garris returned in 1995, developing a script that combined elements of the 1932 film and 1942's The Mummy's Tomb. This draft was a period piece awash in Egyptian art-inspired Art Deco, but the vision once again proved too expensive for the studio and was discarded for a modern setting. While the project came close to entering production, Universal was sold to Seagram. Shainberg chose to produce The Mummy through his independent company and write a new script. Unable to find a suitable high-profile writer and director, Wes Craven was offered, but he turned it down. The project unraveled again, and Garris left the project for the second time. Still determined to create a new Mummy film, Universal hired Kevin Jarre in 1996 to write a new screenplay. According to Jacques, the executives were now convinced the film should be a larger-budget period piece. Stephen Sommers called Jacques and Daniel in 1997 with his vision of the Mummy as a kind of Indiana Jones or Jason and the Argonauts, with the mummy as the creature giving the hero a hard time. Sommers had seen the original film when he was 8 and wanted to recreate the things he liked about it on a bigger scale. Discussing other classic horror characters, Sommers recalled that Frankenstein made me sad. I always felt sorry for him. Dracula was kind of cool and sexy, but the mummy just plain scared me. He had wanted to make a mummy film, but other writers or directors were always attached. After the box office failure of Babe, Pig in the City, among others, Universal needed a hit film. At the time, Universal's management had changed in response to the box office failures, and the losses led the studio to revisit its successful franchises from the 1930s. New chair Stacy Snyder distributed packets detailing the studio's holdings, including nearly 5,000 old scripts and films. Sommers received his window of opportunity and pitched his Mummy to Universal with an 18-page treatment. Sommers did not want to remake the original film. He described the original as a horror film, while his adaptation would be more of a romantic adventure horror movie. Sommers incorporated his own research and the services of a UCLA archaeology professor to make the ancient Egyptian language accurate. Snyder recalled that Sommers' treatment was unique in that it took place in the 1920s rather than a contemporary setting. Universal liked the treatment so much that they approved the concept and increased the budget, and Sommers spent a year working on the screenplay. Casting. Jacques offered the role of Rick O'Connell to Tom Cruise, who was later cast in the reboot film, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck, but the actors were not interested or could not fit the role into their respective schedules. Jacques and Sommers were impressed with George of the Jungle's box office earnings and cast Brendan Fraser as a result. Sommers also commented that he felt Fraser fit the Errol Flynn swashbuckling character he had envisioned for Rick perfectly. Fraser's turn in George bolstered his perceived star power, yet he remained far cheaper than the biggest actors working. Fraser understood that his character doesn't take himself too seriously, otherwise the audience can't go on that journey with him. Evelyn Carnahan was named in tribute to Lady Evelyn Herbert, the daughter of amateur Egyptologist Lord Carnarvon, both present at the opening of the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. The studio originally considered American actresses, and Rachel Weisz auditioned multiple times before getting the part. Weisz was not a big fan of horror films, but saw the movie as more of a hokum comic book. John Hannah was picked for the role of Jonathan Carnahan, despite the fact that Hannah felt he was not a comedic actor, with Sommers saying that he had no idea why we cast him. Jacks had previously produced Hard Target with Arnold Vosloo. The South African actor liked the Mummy script, but told Sommers he wanted to play the role absolutely straight. From Imhotep's point of view, this is a skewed version of Romeo and Juliet. He was offered the role after a single audition. Carrying some extra weight and conscious of it because of Imhotep's skimpy costume, Vosloo lost 10 to 15 pounds for the role by eschewing alcohol and sugar. Filming. Principal photography began on May 4, 1998, and lasted 17 weeks. The crew was unable to shoot in Egypt due to unstable political conditions, so filming began in Marrakesh, Morocco. Marrakesh had the extra advantage of being much less modern than Cairo, making it easier to dress like the 1920s. The production set up 2 weeks before filming, taking down telephone wires and cables and shipping in period cars and camels. Locals served as extras for crowd scenes. After shooting in Marrakech, filming moved to the Sahara Desert outside the small town of Erfoud. Production designer Alan Cameron found a geologic feature, Jarre Meadoir, where the exteriors for Hymenoptera could be constructed. A concrete ramp was built to allow access into the horseshoe-shaped formation, where the city was built from prefabricated parts shipped from England. A survey of the area was conducted so that an accurate model and scale models of the columns and statues could be replicated back at Shepperton Studios, where all of the scenes involving the underground passageways of the City of the Dead were shot. These sets took 16 weeks to build and included fiberglass columns rigged with special effects for the movie's final scenes. To avoid dehydration in the scorching heat of the Sahara, the production's medical team created a drink that the cast and crew had to consume every 2 hours. Sandstorms were daily inconveniences, and wildlife were a major problem, with many crew members having to be airlifted to medical care after being bitten or stung. Fraser nearly died during a scene where his character is hanged. The production had the official support of the Royal Moroccan Army, and the cast members had kidnapping insurance taken out on them. After shooting in North Africa, production moved back to the United Kingdom before completion on August 29, 1998. Here, the dockyards at Chatham doubled for the Giza port on the Nile River. This set was 600 feet, 183 meters in length, and featured a steam train, an Ajax traction engine, 3 cranes, an open 2-horse carriage, 4 horse-drawn carts, 5 dressing horses and grooms, 9 packed donkeys and mules, as well as market stalls, Arab-clad vendors, and room for 300 costumed extras. Special effects. The filmmakers reportedly spent $15 million of the budget on special effects alone. The Mummy features hundreds of shots that required optical or digital special effects in post-production. Effects House, Industrial Light and Magic, ILM contributed more than 140 shots with additional work done by Cinesite, 60 shots, and Pacific Title Mirage, 45 shots, and the film's title sequences. Sommers engaged ILM while still developing the script, having previously worked with ILM effects supervisor John Andrew Burton Jr. on Deep Rising. ILM was eager for the challenge the film provided and produced a proof of concept for the Mummy's effects in late 1997 to demonstrate the feasibility of Sommers' vision to executives. The filmmakers sought to make something faster and scarier for the title creature, using cutting-edge techniques to create something never before seen. ILM started developing the look of the Mummy 3 months before filming started. We wanted to create a photorealistic corpse that was obviously not a man in a suit, obviously not an animatronic, and obviously alive, he recalled. Over a months-long period, the designers worked on developing 4 distinct stages for the Mummy. Stage 1 was the Mummy at its most decayed, with tattered bits of clothing, skin, and sinew hanging over a skeleton. Stage 2 added areas of regenerated skin, with stages 3 and 4 having the Mummy almost fully regenerated with only small areas of its innards showing through. The artist developed black and white sketches, then moved on to color treatments before building the creature in the computer. Models were also made to use as reference for the digital artists. The initial states of the mummy were created entirely by computer, while later stages combined live-action performance. To supplement prosthetics and makeup supplied on set, LED lights and pieces of tape served as tracking points so that digital cutouts could be applied to Vosloo's face and body in post-production. Vosloo remarked that walking around the set, he felt like a Christmas tree. The final creature was created with a combination of live-action acting with prosthetics and digital imagery. A digital representation of the mummy was created in Alias, featuring simulated muscles for much of the body attached to a skeleton. The animators controlled parts of the mummy via procedural animation. Animating the underlying bones in turn controlled the stretch and movement of the overlaid muscles. Finally, layered on top of the procedural animation and motion capture was additional animation to tweak the performance. Given the limitations of the technology, subtle movements like facial or hand animations had to be done by hand. Shots that featured Vosloo with overlaid computer-generated prosthetics were the most difficult for the effects team, requiring careful match moving. Rather than using a stunt performer, Vosloo performed the motion capture for the character himself. Scenes were blocked out and performed on set during principal photography, first with Vosloo in the scene, then without. The shots were then replicated in the motion capture studio, with Vosloo's performance recorded by 8 cameras from different angles. In addition to the mummy, the script called for numerous effects shots to magnify the sweeping adventure of the film. Vistas like a flashback shot of the ancient city of Thebes combined location footage shot in the desert with composited actors shot on green screen, model miniatures, matte paintings, and computer-generated effects. The plague's Imhotep unleashes were accomplished using particle-based computer graphics, with ILM designers swapping out models of different qualities depending on how far from the camera the swarming insects were. While the film made extensive use of computer-generated imagery, many scenes, including ones where Rachel Weisz's character is covered with rats and locusts, were shot using live animals. Another close-up shot used footage of anesthetized locusts attached to a stunt performer, combined with extra computer-generated pests. Sandstorms used procedural graphics based on programs used to create tornadoes in Twister, while the masses of flesh-eating scarabs used techniques developed for Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace. A shot of a firestorm engulfing Cairo combined real palm trees, physical models, and matte paintings with computer-generated hail, fire, and rubble. Pacific Tidal Mirage also enhanced shots with digital camera shake. The finale involves an army of mummies coming to Imhotep's defense. Many of these mummies were created by makeup effects supervisor Nick Dudman, who produced makeup, prosthetics, and animatronic effects in the film. Each suit came with variations for stunt moves or pyrotechnics. After principal photography, the suits were sent to ILM to scan and be modeled in the computer. Using parts of the Imhotep mummy to save time, ILM recreated the underlings digitally to add into the scenes and used motion capture to animate them. The animators credited Fraser's ability to consistently reenact his movements in multiple takes as saving time when it came to match the motion-captured digital mummies to the live-action fight scenes. Music. Further information: The Mummy. The score for The Mummy was composed and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith, with orchestrations provided by Alexander Courage. Goldsmith had previously scored Deep Rising for Sommers. As he reached the final few years of his career, Goldsmith was coming off a number of action and adventure films in the 1990s, from multiple Star Trek films to Air Force One. Goldsmith provided The Mummy with suitably bombastic music, with the traditional European orchestra supplemented with regional instruments such as the bouzouki. The opening of the film contains nearly all of Goldsmith's major themes for the score, with what music critic Jeff Bond calls an Egyptian theme, reused in different configurations throughout to establish the epic settings and sense of place for Hamunaptra. a theme for Imhotep the Mummy that is performed in an understated manner early in the film, before repeating in more forceful, brassy renditions after the mummy has regenerated. A love theme used for both Imhotep Ankhsunamun and Rick Evelyn, and a heroic theme for Rick. In addition to the extensive brass and percussion elements, the score uses sparing amounts of vocals, unusual for much of Goldsmith's work. The soundtrack was released by Decca Records on May 4, 1999. Overall, Goldsmith's score was well received. AllMusic described it as a grand, melodramatic score, which delivered the expected highlights. Other reviews positively noted the dark, percussive sound meshed well with the plot, as well as the raw power of the music. The limited but masterful use of the chorus was also lauded. And most critics found the final track on the CD to be the best overall. On the other hand, some critics found the score lacked cohesion, and that the constant heavy action lent itself to annoying repetition. Roderick Scott off Cinemusic.net summed up the score as representative of both Goldsmith's absolute best and his most mediocre. Thankfully, his favorable work on this release wins out. Release. Test audiences reacted poorly to the film's title, which conjured up negative impressions of an old horror film, but domestic marketing president Mark Schmuger recalled that they decided we would redefine the myth with the film, rather than change the title. Enthusiasm for the film was low, but Universal took out a television spot for the Super Bowl, reportedly costing $1.6 million, that Sommers recalled immediately reversed the discussion of the film's prospects. The producers were concerned that the imminent release of The Phantom Menace would sink the film's box office fortunes, resulting in them moving the release date from May 21st to 7, and Canada on its opening weekend, grossing $43 million in 3,210 theaters. Its weekend take was the highest non-holiday May opening and ninth biggest opening of all time. The film later fell to second place behind The Phantom Menace. The Mummy grossed over $155.4 million in the United States and Canada and $261 million internationally, grossing over $418.1 million worldwide. Reception. The Mummy received mixed reviews from critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 62% based on 104 reviews and an average rating of 5.9 to 10. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 48 out of 100 based on 34 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film a positive review, writing, "There is hardly a thing I can say in its favor, except that I was cheered by nearly every minute of it. I cannot argue for the script, the direction, the acting, or even the mummy, but I can say that I was not bored and sometimes I was unreasonably pleased." Critics such as Entertainment Weekly's Owen Gleiberman and the New York Times' Stephen Holden concurred with the sentiment of the film as a breezy crowd-pleaser. Less positively, Keith Phipps of the AV Club wrote that the film's attempt to create a big, Indiana Jones-inspired action film felt forced, and the result was unsatisfying. Other reviews complained of an overstuffed plot or recycled elements from Better Movies 43. Reviewers comparing the film to the 1932 original sometimes favored the original's focus on atmosphere and dread, though others welcomed the change to a more energetic Indiana Jones-type film. The effects were generally praised, especially the title creature. Ernest Larson's review for Jump Cut felt that the effects were too similar to ILM's other work, and that the effects alone could not support the weight of the rest of the movie. Bob Graham of the San Francisco Chronicle and Hal Hinson from the Dallas Observer agreed that the effects never overshadowed the human aspects of the film. Gleiberman said that the horrors of the effects were undercut by the lightheartedness of the film, while the BBC's Almar Haflidason felt that the effects were occasionally unconvincing, and the heavy reliance on cutting-edge computer-generated imagery would likely date the film heavily as time passed. Critics generally praised the acting, with Haflidason writing that the efforts of the cast sold material that would otherwise have been cheesy. David Hunter of The Hollywood Reporter wrote that all the actors managed to hold their own amid the special effects, although he felt Vosloo was largely wasted after Imhotep regenerates, and the screenplay gives him little to do. Reviews from USA Today, the British Film Institute, and the AV. Club said the film featured questionable casting of ethnic roles and occasionally traded in stereotypes of Arabs. Writing to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the film's release, writer Maria Lewis said that on paper, The Mummy should not have been a success, as yet another period adventure film coming after a decade of failed period adventure films. Its connection with audiences, if not critics, was down to its successful blend of heart, humor, heroics, and horror. She declared it the pivotal blockbuster of the 90s. Emma Stefanski, writing for Thrillist, said it was the beginning of the end for action-adventure films, as superhero films would soon supplant it in the coming years. Rotten Tomatoes called the film Indiana Jones for a new generation. Reviewers felt Fraser's portrayal of Rick set a new mold for action heroes that more films would follow in the years after, while also considering Evelyn a character allowed to break free from a traditional damsel in distress role. Retrospective overviews. Complex and Sci-Fi described the film as a classic action film, generating retrospective praise for Brendan Fraser's portrayal of Rick O'Connell. Home media. The Mummy was released on home video in VHS and DVD formats on September 28, 1999. The title was a tremendous success for Universal on home video, selling 7 million units on VHS and 1 million on DVD, making it the year's best-selling live-action VHS and second best-selling DVD, behind The Matrix. The Mummy's performance helped Universal gross over $1 billion in home video sales. On April 24, 2001, a 2-disc Ultimate Edition DVD of the film premiered to coincide with the release of The Mummy Returns. The film was later digitally remastered and received a Blu-ray release in 2008. It was subsequently re-released on 4K Ultra HD in 2017 as both a standalone title and in a trilogy pack with its sequels. Adaptation. The Mummy's box office performance led to numerous sequels and spin-offs. The film sequel The Mummy Returns 2001 features most of the surviving principal characters. As a married couple, Rick and Evelyn confront Imhotep and the Scorpion King. The film also introduces the hero's son, Alex. A second sequel, The Mummy Tomb of the Dragon Emperor 2008, takes place in China with the Terracotta Emperor inspiring the villain and Rachel Weisz replaced with Maria Bello. The films inspired an animated TV series titled The Mummy, which lasted 2 seasons and a spin-off prequel, The Scorpion King 2002. Universal announced plans in 2012 to reboot the franchise. A new film, also titled The Mummy, was released in June 2017 to poor critical and box office performance. Developer Konami. Nagoya published 2 video game adaptations of The Mummy under license from Universal Interactive Studios. In 2000, an action-adventure game for the PlayStation and Microsoft Windows developed by Rebellion Developments, as well as a Game Boy Color puzzle game. There was also a 2002 video game based on the 2001 animated series, published by Ubisoft for Game Boy Advance. The film also inspired a roller coaster, Revenge of the Mummy, found in 3 Universal Studios theme parks, Hollywood, California, Orlando, Florida, and Sentosa, Singapore. Characters of the film feature in Funko Fusion, set to be released in 2024. The Mummy Review. 25 years ago, action-adventure maestro Stephen Sommers had a big summer hit on his hands. As writer and director, he had revived the renowned Universal Studios scary movie brand as a fun family film in the Indiana Jones style. Arnold Vosloo had the role that Boris Karloff played in the 1930s. Imhotep, the high priest bandaged up for death by mummification on account of his treachery in ancient Egypt and accidentally brought back from the undead thousands of years later by romantic adventurers and scamps of the 20th century's jazz age, seeking excitement and enlightenment in Egypt. But our heroes are scholar and librarian Evelyn Carnahan, played by Rachel Weisz, her madcap brother Jonathan, John Hannah, their roguish guide Gad Hassan, Omid Jalili, and, most importantly, dashing American soldier of fortune Rick O'Connell, played by the unbearably handsome young Brendan Fraser, who knows where the legendary city of the dead, Hamunaptra, is to be found. The movie became a trilogy with 2 more films, and was even revived with Tom Cruise in the American adventurer role. The Mummy is cheerful, good-natured, and entertaining, and its cast did engagingly silly things like ride camels through the desert. Though the film relies on some dodgy stereotypes, not really palatable despite the 1920s setting. It also mixed live action and digital fabrication for set pieces, which would now naturally be entirely digital. In fact, the franchise involved more and more green screen work as it continued. It has enormous flair and attack, and it's an old-fashioned, if paradoxically unadventurous adventure, an anti-Ishtar of box office success. But in many ways, it is impossible to look back on this film except through the poignant lens of Fraser's own life. The injuries and illnesses brought on by doing a lot of his own stunts on the Mummy films, the deceleration of his career after the franchise ended, and his depression due to a sexual assault in 2003 by the president of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. An ugly and chaotic incident which, as much as anything, utterly discredited the HFPA and forced it to reform. And then there was Fraser's amazing comeback in Darren Aronofsky's 2022 drama The Whale, giving an Oscar-winning performance which channeled both his personal pain and played to the audience's growing sympathy for him. What emerges so strongly from The Mummy is the irony. Fraser's Rick is supposed to be the wised-up tough guy who knows all the angles, whereas Weisz's sweet ingenue and Hannah's goofy Wodehousian chap are supposed to be the clueless ones. But it is Fraser who is the innocent. In fact, he looks almost unbearably innocent. His broad, open, handsome, and lovable face is boyish, even babyish. The Mummy wouldn't have been a hit without him. There is within me an unslaked hunger for preposterous adventure movies. I resist the bad ones, but when a Congo or an anaconda comes along, my heart leaps up and I cave in. The Mummy is a movie like that. There is hardly a thing I can say in its favor, except that I was cheered by nearly every minute of it. I cannot argue for the script, the direction, the acting, or even the Mummy, but I can say that I was not bored, and sometimes I was unreasonably pleased. There is a little immaturity stuck away in the crannies of even the most judicious of us, and we should treasure it. This is a movie about a man who fooled around with the Pharaoh's mistress and lived and died and lived again to regret it. As his punishment, he is mummified alive, sealed inside a sarcophagus with thousands of flesh-eating beetles, which eat flesh very slowly, we learn. Millennia pass. In the 1920s, a French foreign legionnaire named Rick meets a librarian named Evelyn and joins with her and her brother in an unwise quest to find Hamunaptra, the city of the dead. Sample dialogue. Are we talking about the Hamunaptra? They get into a race with other fortune hunters who have heard of untold treasure buried beneath the sands, while meanwhile the descendants of the high priests, who have guarded the city for 3,000 years, move against them. There is good reason not to disturb the mummy, named Imhotep. If he is brought back to life, he will arise a walking disease, we learn, and unleash the 10 proverbial plagues upon Egypt, of which in the course of the movie I counted locusts, fireballs from the sky, rivers running with blood, earthquakes, and flies. Also, of course, the flesh-eating beetles, although I was not certain whether they were a plague or came with the territory. Brendan Fraser plays Rick, a low-rent Indiana Jones who single-handedly fights his way through a bewildering series of battles. Evelyn, Rachel Weisz, is too clumsy to be much help. In a delightful early scene, she knocks over one bookcase and the domino effect knocks over every single bookcase in the Museum of Antiquities. Her brother Jonathan, John Hannah, is a spoiled rich kid who specializes in the sorts of asides that butlers used to make. Arnold Vosloo plays Imhotep the mummy in the later scenes, after Imhotep has absorbed the inner organs of enough victims to reconstitute himself. In the earlier scenes, Imhotep is a ghastly special effects creature who seems constituted of decomposed cardboard and lets out a cloud of dust every time Rick slices him. None of this has anything to do with the great horror classic The Mummy, 1932, which starred Boris Karloff in a strangely poignant performance as a long-dead priest who returns to life and falls in love with the modern reincarnation of the woman he died for. The 1932 movie contains no violence to speak of. There's hardly any action, indeed, and the chills come through slow realizations. Hey, did that mummy move? This 1999 mummy does indeed mumble something about his feelings for Evelyn, who may be descended from the pharaoh's mistress on her mother's side. But the bass on his voice synthesizer was set to rumble, and so I was not quite sure what he said. It sounded vaguely affectionate, in the way that a pit bull growling over a T-bone sounds affectionate. But how can Imhotep focus on rekindling a 3,000-year-old romance when he has 10 plagues to unleash? There's a lot of funny dialogue in the movie, of which my favorite is a line of Evelyn's after she hears a suspicious noise in the museum library. Abdul, Mohammed, Bob. I like the Goldfinger paint job on the priests in ancient Thebes, and the way a beetle burrowed in through a guy's shoe and traveled through his body, a lump under his flesh, until it could dine on his brain. And the way characters were always reading the wrong pages of ancient books and raising the dead by accident. Look, art, this isn't. Great trash, it isn't. Good trash, it is. It's not quite up there with Anaconda, but it's as much fun as Congo and The Relic, and it's better than Species. If those 4 titles are not intimately familiar to you, The Mummy might not be the place to start. The Mummy, I have fond memories of over everyone crowding around the VCR to watch it, and then the unfortunate moment when someone decided to hand out tea and coffee every couple of years. I will think about watching it again, but then wonder if too much time has passed. But then when they keep remaking it, both in name with The Mummy and in spirit with films like Jungle Cruise, means that no matter what, there is a core here that is timeless. So to set the scene in Thebes, the capital of the ancient Egyptian Empire in 1260 BC, and home to Pharaoh Seti Arinapale and his high priest, Imhotep Arnold Vosloo. One fateful day, the pharaoh's mistress, Angsune Patricia Velasquez, and the priest were caught in their affair when Imhotep brushed the makeup from her shoulder, and they struck. The pharaoh down with his own blade, soon they were all captured at Hamaptra, the city of the dead and cursed for their crimes in 1923 AD. Hamaptra is at most a ruin, but for many just a legend, but the French Legion found it and was massacred. With only Rick O'Connell, Brendan Fraser, and Benny Gabor, Kevin J. O'Connor surviving to tell others of the treasure and curse that may await you there. 3 years later, one Evelyn Carnahan, Rachel Weisz might just take them up on that. Now, to be clear from the start, this is a film made in 1992, and with that comes the technical limitations of the time and the unfortunate baggage that comes with that time. A lot of the visual effects feel outdated outside of the titular mummy, an awkward moon placement, a matte painting that doesn't quite sync, and things like that. There is also not a lot of cultural awareness of the local region, with some characters getting cherry-picked attributes from across the Levant, while there are a lot of small things that are all over the place. I will say that they do get some details right. Seti was a pharaoh during the 19th dynasty, and their capital was Thebes. If there is one thing that The Mummy nails that I wish more films these days would, it would be all their perfect introductions. When time is of the essence, you must encapsulate a character entirely in one interaction. Take Evelyn in that scene when you first meet her. You know that she is organized, well-versed in classics and histories in a time when that was difficult for women, strong-willed, and a walking disaster at times. Jonathan Carnahan, John Hannah, is irreverent in everything. Yethi and Evelyn are not that far apart. Rick Unnell swaggers onto the screen and does not stop swaggering for the entirety of the film. Warden Gad Hassan Omid Jalile is Hansi, the American brothers Gunho and Dr. Alan Chamberlain. Jonathan Hyde is a self-righteous twit who is happy sacrificing workers. This is also a film that perfectly knows how to build tension. You can see this on a micro level, like when Benny tries to escape the carnage and then runs into the mummy. The slow back away as he runs through all the religions he knows trying to stop the oncoming death, or how before the water turns to blood, we are introduced to the fountain in the middle of the room twice, and then the sound of water slowly increases to focus you on it. It also works on the macro level. For a film called The Mummy, It takes almost an hour, half the film, before it appears. And even longer for him to be a real threat. This could have been disastrous if the film had no expertly managed the suspense of what the team were heading towards. On top of all this, The Mummy is just a bunch of fun, which says something for a film that still jumps into the horror genre times. It is filled with moments that are still iconic. O'Connell screaming back at the Mummy, or lines like, "Hey O'Connell, it looks to... I've got all the horses." Benny looks to him like, "You're on the wrong side of the back river," or "He must have been someone of great importance," or "He did something very naughty," to name a few. It provides the perfect amount of levity to counter the horror elements, as does the phenomenal chemistry between Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz makes the film work in the end. I recommend. The Mummy, to be fair, some parts have not aged well at all, but at its heart it is a perfect action-adventure romp across Egypt. You also can see its DNA across cinema to this days. Soys, yes, we'll recommend the film warts and all if you like The Mummy. We would also recommend to you Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle by Brian McNamara. You can follow Brian on Twitter here. When he's not chatting about movies and TV, he'll be talking about international relations or the solar system. Have you watched The Mummy? Let us know what you thought in the comments below. Feel free to share this review on any of the social medias, and you can follow us or check out all our past reviews and articles here. And have a happy day. As a rule, I dislike horror movies or thrillers very much. Not only do I dislike today's slasher films, but I am also not a fan of the old horror classics that feature actors like Bela Lon Chaney Jr. and Boris Karloff. In other words, the slasher films disgust me. The old horror classics tend to creep me out. One of those old horror classics happened to be the 1932 movie The Mummy, starring Karloff. Told the story of an ancient Egyptian priest named Imhotep that became a mummy and ended up terrorizing Cairo 77 years. Later director Stephen Sommers remade the old classic into a half-horror, half-adventure tale in the style of Indiana Jones, about how members of a treasure-seeking expedition in 1920s Egypt revived Imhotep, who wreaked havoc upon the expedition camp in Cairo. I had been prepared to ignore this remake, until a relative informed me that this version had been filmed in the style of an Indiana Jones movie, being a fan of the Lucas Spielberg movies. I lowered my guard and saw the movie. Looking back at my decision, nearly 15 years later, I am glad that I had seen The Mummy. My relative had been right. The movie felt more like an action-adventure film with a touch of horror. Well, more than a touch. After all, this was a tale about an Egyptian mummy that came back to life, but I loved every minute of the film. Well, almost, but I believe that it was a perfect blend of action, the supernatural adventure, comedy, and romance. My two favorite sequences featured the Medai, descendants of Pharaoh Seti's palace guards, attacking the Nile River steamboat, conveying the heroes from Cairo to Hammurabi of the treasure they sought in Imhotep's remains, and Imhotep's reign of terror in Cairo as she sought the three Americans and the Egyptologist who possessed the canopic jars that held the mummy's preserved organsies. Especially enjoyed this last sequence because I feel that it managed to evoke the surreal and mysterious atmosphere of the old 30s horror films more than any other sequence in the movie. Another one of the movie's major virtues turned out to be its cast. Brendan Fraser did a great job in portraying the aggressive soldier of fortune. Rick Uno must have been at least 30 years old around the time he shot The Mummy, and I must say that he also managed to project a strong and masculine screen presence with a touch of sly humor. Creating screen chemistry with Fraser was Rachel Weisz, who portrayed the inexperienced yet enthusiastic archaeologist Drevlin. Carnahan really enjoyed how she injected a mixture of charm and spirit into the very ladylike Evelyn, and John Hannah rounded out the golden trio as Jonathan Carnahan. Evelyn's humorous yet slightly decadent older brother Hannah was very funny as Evelyn's self-serving brother, who seemed more interested in making a quick buck instead of doing hard work. Kevin Jock, Connor, a favorite of Sommers, gave Asli an hilarious performance as the Hungarian-born Benny Gabber, Rick's immoral former Foreign Legion comrade that becomes Imhotep's willing minion. OK, Connor was especially hilarious in a scene that featured Benny's attempts to save himself from Imhotep's wrath by invoking God's help in different languages. Actor Odd Fair provided a great deal of dash and intensity as Ardith Bay, the leader of Medi actors Stephen Dunham. Corey Johnson and Tuck Watkins provided plenty of their own comic relief as the three American adventurers seeking treasure from Hammurabi. Jonathan Hyde provided a stable contrast to their lunacy as the Egyptian archaeologist who serves as their expedition's Egyptologist specialist. Patricia Velasquez gave a brief but very memorable performance as Angsuni, the ancient Egyptian courtesan that happened to be the love of Imhotep's life. Speaking of Imhotep, Arnold Vosloo literally made a name for himself as the imposing and ruthless high priest and future mummy who becomes obsessed with reuniting with his love through any means possible despite its vast array of virtues. The Mummy had its share of flaws when some of the humor and so-called which struck me as rather silly and sophomore-ishals, so found it annoying that the Rickonell character seemed inclined to constantly use a gun for every situation, especially when they worked fruitlessly against supernatural beings like Mummy's costume designer John Bloomfield did a piss-poor job with Rachel Weisz's costumes. I realized that Westerners in the far reaches of the British Empire tend to dress more conservatively than their fellow citizens in Great Britain, but that was no excuse for why Evelyn wore an outfit and hairstyle dated a decade older than the movie's 1920 setting. However, my biggest problem with the movie happened to be the final showdown between the heroes and Imhotep inside the temple. How can I put this director, Stephen Sommers, added new meaning to the phrase over the top. Not only did the action and special effects strike me successive, but almost seemed to gone with no end in sight. Despite my misgivings of The Mummy, I still enjoyed the movie very much. It is a fun movie filled with memorable character humors, suspense, and some genuine fright form. It turned out to be one of the better summer blockbusters of the late 1990s. More detail. It's easy to complain about these seemingly endless number of remakes nowadays, but it's not as though it's a new trend so long as cinema exists. Remakes will too, as they have 4 decades, good and bad. That's not to suggest that very film can or even should be remade, but sometimes there's a film whose ideas, themes, or imagery barely scratch the surface the first time around, leaving behind something for a new filmmaker to come along and find dust off and do more with those assets than just merely reassemble them in the same exact fashion as before. Take, for instance, a film like David Cronenberg's The Fly, a distinct classic horror work that people love and respect for what it did within the genre, despite being a remake of the 1958 film with the same name. It took the original's core idea and blossomed into something grotesque and beautiful, offering something wholly new in the process. Compare that to, say, Gus Van's 1998 remake of Alfred Hitchcock's iconic Psycho, an absolute bomb that skipped out on bringing anything innovative to the table in favor of merely recreating Hitchcock's classic shot for shot, resulting in a hollow husk of a film Noon asked for and Noon needed. The best remakes take something we know and may even be against seeing remade and give us something we didn't realize we wanted until we have it. And yet sometimes there are things that will never die, no matter how many times they're exploited, like the iconic monsters of old that frightened audiences long before characters like Freddy Krueger or the Alien or Michael Myers took center stage. The tales of Dracula, Frankenstein, and his monster, the Wolfman, and all the rest have been recounted and reimagined in every way one can possibly think of over the years, to the point it would take something truly unique to have an impact anymore, though, no matter how many times these characters are brought to life all over again. Their most iconic cinematic forms will always be tied to the Universal horror films. It's really no surprise that in this day and age where the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has motivated studios to chase after ways to see their properties turned into connected universes, Universal has elected to go back to their well of horror icons who once provided the company with their own crossover universe long before Marvel made it chic to bring them to the modern age. But this isn't obviously anything new for the company, who has frequently dabbled with their icons to varying success. Their most notable remake being, of course, 1999's The Mummy. See, I was getting there. Eventually, the original Boris Karloff film, released all the way back in 1932, and to this day still drips in dusty, mysterious atmosphere, and its titular character's look is just as unforgettable as that of his contemporaries like Dracula and Frankenstein's monster. As with all those films, though time has changed how effective The Mummy and his cohorts are at striking terror in audiences' hearts, what once caused theatergoers to faint is now humorous in retrospect, as the horror genre itself has evolved in ways that would likely cause those very same people to spontaneously combust. Their influence and impact is undeniable. Make no mistake, but a huge chunk off the modern audience who couldn't care less about such facts. Those classic films are boring, and so too have the monsters of old evolved from boogeymen to pussycats in the public eye over the years. Universal has tackled bringing characters like the Wolfman and Dracula back to life in an attempt to make them scary again, but nor real avail, which makes their most successful outing yet. All the more curious for the fact it clicked with audience simply as a result of dropping any pretense of being scary. The Mummy has its wonderfully creepy moments, but at its heart, it's an unabashed adventure film and owes just as much to the types of pulp serials that inspired the Indiana Jones franchise as it does the film on which it's based, eschewing outright horror for the sake of being fun in 1999. This didn't work for too many critics, but it succeeded anyway, even spawning its own franchise consisting of 2 direct sequels, an animated series, video games, and an entire spin-off series in The Scorpion King, at odds with so many remakes that fade into obscurity as soon as they've come. The Mummy is on the surface anything but a flawless film on that the self-categorized upper class of the cinema-critiquing elite will likely forever look down their nose at simply because it exists, but it's a perfect engine of a movie. Nonetheless, by now you undoubtedly know the basic setup. The Egyptian high priest Imhotep, eternally in love with Ankh-Sunay, is mummified in 1290 BC, leaving behind a curse that states that should he ever be resurrected, he'll bring about the end of the world. And so things go until the 1920s when he's accidentally brought back and desperate to reunite with his former lover, kicking off the rest of the film in a way that honors the inherent romanticism of the character that existed in the original film, while expanding the scope of the film to make its titular monster more than just a shamblin. Jeets Red Imhotep, is played by Arnold Vosloo, is cool and dangerous, and thought the audience is never really clued into anything about him beyond his drive to bring back Ankh-Sun, that the character simply works anyway, imposing more as a monstrous force of nature than as some sort of Machiavellian villain. It's a far cry from Karoff's subdued take on the character who disappeared and quietly camouflaged himself in society after his resurrection as Imhotep wastes no time in ensuring people fear him, sucking the life force out of his victims and using all sorts of tricks to demonstrate his power. And for any film that relies on the heavy use of CGI, particularly to bring an entire character to lifetime, usually tends to not be on its side in terms of the effects aging gracefully. So it's kind of amazing that the CGI work behind Imhotep's initial mummy form still holds up over 7 years later, gifting the film with a monster that still looks great. Of course, other aspects of the CGI work haven't aged as well, like some late game appearances of Imhotep's lackeys, but they're so trivial that it almost doesn't really matter, as the film embraces the power of practical effects in a way that has paid off for the film's longevity. In a time when blockbuster films overuse their green screens, it's refreshing to revisit a film like The Mummy and revel in actual production design with amazing sets contributing to the film's epic scale in a way green screens just can't nail down. The Mummy presents a world that feels like one we can reach out and touch, rallying on CGI only as a tool, not a crutch as it should be. This same notion extends to its action sequences, moments like a carescape through the streets of Cairo or daring flight across the deserts, and so the final showdown with him works so well because they simply feel real again. Real sets and props and actual extras help breathe life into this moments in a way. Doing it against a green screen wouldn't, and the action beats still hold up as a result, especially for their remarkable restraint in knowing when to end or stay relatively grounded. A surprise considering the series went on to feature giant CGI scorpion men and yetis kicking field goals. Those very action scenes are also spaced out well. When they arrive, they're earned, spicing up the proceedings at just the right times. The film runs at just over 2 hours. But never once feels a task. The narrative is paced at such a propulsive speed that never feels sluggish nor breakneck, and just as the film knows when to pump the brakes on its action sequences, knows when to do away with unnecessary exposition, it's a tightly focused film, particularly on Imhotep has been unleashed, but its main characters never feels lighted as a result, which is another saving grace for the film. Its broadcast is chock full of stereotypes, from the gun-toting ignorant Americans to the haughty sexist Englishmen to its unfortunate portrayal of Arabs as nothing more than punchlines and red shirts. But if you can look past that, the core cast is incredibly endearing. There's Brendan Fraser's Indies-esque charming swashbuckler Rick Unnell, Rachel Weisz's proud and intelligent librarian Evie John Hanna's slippery but lovable Jonathan Oded Farr's stoic badass Ardith Bay, and Kevin Jock Connor's delightfully insufferable Weasel Benny. There's an incredible amount of chemistry among the cast, all of whom are clearly in on the fun, a fact that more than works in favor of the film, which never fails to take Tim. Had to capitalize on their collective charm, from simple scenes of Rick and Evie bonding over drinking to Jonathan and Artith's differing reactions to being strapped to the wings of Abiplane. There's not a whole lot of depth afforded to the characters, but they are the spark that makes the whole thing work effective, not for their complexities, but for the simple fact they're also likable. On top of all of this, the film has an incredible score by the late Jerry Goldsmith, while I ultimately prefer certain aspects of Alan Silvester's score for The Mummy Returns. Goldsmith's work here is fantastic, rousing, epic, and romantic in a way that thoroughly enriches the film and feels like an ode to scores of old. It truly is solid work from beginning to end, made even more amazing for the fact that Goldsmith himself allegedly hated the film, and having to work on it, those I mentioned earlier, the film does dabble with horror via effective scenes like a creepy sequence in which a character loses their glasses moments before being attacked by Hymep, or the skin-crawling imagery of what scarabs do to people. It's an adventure film, unashamed about what it is. Nearly 2 decades have passed since it came out, and it's still something I can come across on television, turn on, and watch straight through to the end, sucked in regardless of whether it's 5 minutes in or 50 minutes from the end. The Mummy is about to undergo yet another reincarnation as part of Universal's bid for their own monster-filled universe. In 2050 or 100 years from now, it'll undoubtedly be dug up and remade all over again. Whether any of them work or not remains to be seen, but Form Stephen Sommers' 1999 stab at the horror-icon will remain an enjoyable classic in its own right. It's pulp to the highest degree, but one whose pure entertainment value on all fronts is one that stuck with me through the years, the type of rare summer blockbuster whose pervasive charms thoroughly outweighed any shortcomings it had an arduous task in attempting to make mummies scary or relevant in front of it, and instead sidestep that endeavor at the risk of alienating fans of both horror and the iconic monster, finding an identity for itself that struck gold at just the right time in the end. And to bring this full circle, remakes by their very nature won't please everyone, and maybe that's a good thing. Had The Mummy tried to be a straight horror film, we could have wound up with a forgettable product like 2011's The Wolf Manor, 2014's Dracula Untold. It took what we knew and completely rebuilt the whole concept from the ground up, maybe not giving us the horror yarn we expected, but giving us the adventure film we didn't know we wanted, one that has aged well its characters and imagery and snappy dialogue, just as memorable and satisfying today as they were back in 1999. It strove to stand on its own 2 legs rather than on the shoulders of its predecessor in Dina time, when an increasing number of remakes seemingly exists solely to try and recapture magic for a buck, only to wildly miss the mark. The Mummy deserves a lot of credit for going against expectations and getting it right. Adventure movies are so much fun, don't get me wrong. I am absolutely a film snob, but sometimes I need to unwind and watch Indiana Jones punch Nazis. I love my war films, my dramas, and my indie flicks, but they scratch a different itch than the classic adventure film, frankly. I'm tired of pretending that adventure is worse for being. The genre of the blockbuster adventure is just as valid as any other genre, and if you don't believe me, you just listen as I regale you with the expert filmcraft of 1999's The Mummy. Now, as a concept, The Mummy should not work. It's an adaptation of a Universal monster movie from 1932 that keeps very little of the original plot and has a twin somewhere between Raiders of the Lost Ark and Avengers, but miraculously The Mummy synthesizes all these disparate elements into a movie that makes sense despite being 2 hours long. The Mummy flies by the pacing of the film is incredibly quick, but at no time do the filmmakers sacrifice the story to do so the best way. I can describe The Mummy as using every part of the animal. Nothing in this film happens without a purpose. Why does the library curator carelessly burn an ancient artifact? Well, it cleverly sets up that he is a member of the Tomb Guardians that are keeping the titular mummy sealed in his sarcophagus. Why are we wasting time on this random British pilot? Well, he's going to be important later because he helps the gang fly to Hamra for the final battle. At no point are we shown anything that is not absolutely necessary to the plot, and this demonstrates a strong understanding of film as an art form. In film, you are constrained to a much shorter runtime than other mediums, and as such, it is hard to write compelling characters and compelling plot. But The Mummy gets around this by tightly interweaving characterization and plot development. Great example of this is seen in Evelyn's room on the riverboat. Not only does it show her feelings for male lead Rick Unell in one line of dialogue, but it also furthers the plot by destroying the boat and planting the idea in the mind of the audience and the characters that a key is needed to open Hotep's tomb. Every character in this film serves apropos, and Noon stays in the story longer than is absolutely necessary, but in spite of this, they are all entertaining and engaging. The four Americans are great examples of this. They are antagonists to the heroes, competing to reach Hamina first and Digitup for plunder. Rather thank knowledge, and their callousness is shown in how they use their local workers as fodder for the City of the Dead's booby traps, but their primary purpose is to dig up the film's primary antagonist, Imhotep, and get all their body parts sucked out one by one. 2. Reconstitute. The titular hymn, the Americans are fun antagonists, but once they've served their purpose in the story, they're disposed of. Most characters are like this, showing up, progressing the plot, and endearing themselves to the audience, and then the exceptions to this are our three main characters, O'Connell, Evelyn, and Joan, and the antagonist turned friend Ardith Bay. They all still serve a function, but they are not nearly as disposable as secondary characters. Like the four Americans, the museum curator or suicidal pilot, dashing American adventurer Rick Unell, and proper British librarian Evelyn Carneham are the film's main characters, and their blossoming romances serve as an emotional undercurrent throughout of Tenon. Action films. The primary romance between the leading man and woman can come across as forced and unnecessary, only included for the sake of convention. See the Indiana Jones films, but in The Mummy, considerable time is spent developing the romance between Rick and Evie, such as the scene of them getting drunk at the dig site, or Evie's frustration at Rick's seeming piggishness on the riverboat with only 3 or 4 scenes. The filmmakers managed to invest the audience in their dynamic, creating a likable couple who you actually want to get together in the end now, while Evie enders herself to the audience. With her cleverness and passion for ancient Egypt, their brother Joan is far less important on paper. All he really does, plot-wise, is obtain the map to Hemnap, but John's real purpose is to bring some levity to an otherwise rather gloomy film, while Evie is the scholar and Rick is the action hero. John is the comedic sidekick in his cowardice, greed, and loudmouth nature. Keep the tone light and fun, even while people are having their tongues ripped out by Imhotep. Finally, the intimidating Ardith Bay serves as a narrative multi-tool. At the beginning of the film, he and the rest of the Medi, the guardians of Imhotep's tomb, are antagonists attacking anyone who tries to disturb the cursed corpse. But as soon as our intrepid heroes release Imhotep, he teams up with them to help defeat the mummy. Ardith Bay not only adds stakes to the early story, serving as an obstacle preventing the gang from reaching their goal, but he also brings knowledge of Imhotep and his powers as well. Raw, unmatched skill that manages to out-action hero. Our action hero protagonist. Yes, Ardith Bay does not serve a narrative purpose after he distracts the horde of mummified priests chasing our hero's Butenuan, who rips a belt-fed machine gun off an airplane and uses it to put the undead back in the ground, deserves to survive on Cool Factoral 1. While I'm talking about characters, I would be remiss not to mention the film's two main antagonists. The first is Orsneveling's secondary villain, Benny, this little creep. He's a consistent annoyance throughout the film, and he's characterized as the most punchable man on the planet. This guy only cares about personal wealth and has no moral code whatsoever. He literally makes a deal with a corpse who wants to become the mummy king of mankind in exchange for a handful of gold and right. Before that, we see him try and use various different holy symbols to ward off the Sandy. Sorcerer. This actually shows another core part of his character, which adds to his drop psychability. He is the biggest coward in the film. Anytime he is faced with any sort of danger, he tries to hide or run. In fact, in the climax of the film, he runs away to steal gold from the city. While the protagonist's battle in Hotep Beni is precision designed to aggravate the audience, and the characters making it all the better when he's eaten alive by flesh-eating scarabs at the end of the film. But their ill villain is the mummy himself, Imhotep, and he is deservingly grand in life. Imhotep was the high priest to Pharaoh, said, but the fell in love with the Pharaoh's mistress Angsunaman. When the Pharaoh discovered this treason, Imhotep and his lover killed him, only for the palace to be swarmed by the Pharaoh's bodyguards. The Magi, who chase off Imhotep and kill the traitorous Angzun with the help of his priests. Imhotep recovers the body of his love and brings her to Hamaptra, the city of the dead, to resurrect her. But he was followed, and he and his priests are interrupted by the Magi. The priests are mummified alive, as is Imhotep, who had his tongue ripped out and his sarcophagus filled with flesh-eating scarabs. This horrifying and over-the-top backstory is fitting of Imhotep, who is a suitably horrifying and dramatic villain after his accidental resurrection. Imhotep must reconstitute his body by recovering his sacred Kopik jars and stealing the body parts of those who awakened him. In addition to this, Imhotep possesses magical powers of sand manipulation, which doesn't sound scary until he conjures a massive dust storm to forcibly ground an airplane. Imhotep has all sorts of other abilities too many to name really, but they all are used for his ultimate goal of resurrecting his lost love Angsoon, and despite everything he's done to get this far, his desperation to be reunited with his lovers somehow keeps him sympathetic. Imhotep is not a super complex character, but he's compelling in the grandness of his evil and the humanity of his motivation. The Mummy is a film overflowing with passion. Characters are engaging, the plot is adventurous, the pacing is immaculate, and the only real criticism I can give is the CGI that looks more ancient than the ruined Soph-the-Hem opera. Hotep's CGI corpse looks like the crumbs in my air fryer. I can look past that because the rest of the movie holds up so well. It may not have the deepest plot or characters, but The Mummy 1999 still demonstrates aerial understanding of the art of film craft, and I cannot describe it as anything other than an action classic X-Train formation. Oh, you know, that fourth Indiana Jones movie for which we've been waiting 10 years. Well, here it is, from its wowzer of an opening in ancient Egypt to the spectacular finale featuring an army of reanimated bandage, dripping soldiers. The Mummy is an enthralling non-stop thrill ride, the best popcorn flick in years. Purest fun I've had at the movies since I can't remember when smashing day for the start of an adventure. Jonathan Caring, John Hannah says, setting the pulpy tuning of the Mummy right off the bat. It's 1926 and a group of wannabe tomb raiders sets off from Cairo for the ruins of Hema Prath, the fabled city of the dead, where the earliest pharaohs were said to have hidden the wealth of Egypt. According to Evelyn Carnarvon, Rachel Weisz, she's a librarian at the Museum of Antiquities. In her dream of being the next Howard Carter, note that a Lord Carnarvon was with Carter when he discovered Tut's tomb, will lead her twit brother, an American soldier, Rick Unnell, Brendan Fraser from Gods and Monsters, into a world of magic, cancient maps, cool artifacts, and constant peril with a ragtag team of hangers-on and a rival group of Americans, all ripe for the slow picking off by the unimaginable horrors ahead on their heels. They, of course, find the city of Yu where the Yups accidentally awaken. Imhotep, Arnold Vosloo, high priest of Osiris for his crime of Nuki with the pharaoh's mistress. Imhotep was mummified alive 3,000 years earlier, this horrible fate leaving him undead for eternity. And are members of an ancient secret society, the descendants of the pharaoh's bodyguards, who are sworn to protect Imhotep's mummy. They were supposed to prevent it from being reanimated, lest Imhotep, Aubrey flesh eater, with the strength of ages. Now they tell us, of course, the curse on Imhotep's sarcophagus did warn that death will come on swift wings to whomever opens the thing. If you're looking for a thematic remake of the 1932 classic, you won't find it here. There's none of the ethos of Boris Karloff's Mummy, and our bad guy Imhotep is a killing machine, a millennia-old, seemingly unstoppable Terminator. But so what, The Mummy is so diverting because it doesn't take anything about itself too seriously. Well, no, mummies don't exist. Writer-director Stephen Sommers seems to be telling us, but let's pretend just for fun. The film's gruesomeness is mostly off-camera and punctuated by laughs, and Sommers makes sure the Mummy revels in its winking movie. The golden glow that pervades the film, gorgeous desert sunsets, gilded temple's warm torchlight, isn't just symbolic of a longing for A.J. Peterman fantasy world of biplanes, khakis, and worn leather, satchel, shining priceless historical treasures. It's also indicative of a nostalgia for the great rollicking movies of the past. Not just the obvious Raiders of the Lost Ark, but also classic adventures like Lawrence of Arabia. Evelyn can crack wise in the face of impending doom, and Rick can't tell us of this darkest hour when all seems lost. That it's up to him and his chum Store, rescue the damsel in distress, kill the bad guy, and save the world because they're in on the joke. 2, it's just a movie, they're saying, but come along for the ride. It'll be a good one. The Mummy's special effects are quite literally eye-popping. Imhotep goes about rebuilding his half-decomposed body by borrowing parts from hapless mortals. The swarms of flesh-eating scarabs, in particular, are cool, gross, and Imhotep's preferred method of transportation. As a whirlwind of sand is brilliantly done, but the FX all serve the story and the characters, which is as it should be, and as self-aware as the characters are, they're still compelling thanks to note-perfect performances Seveline and Rick R. Basically, Indiana Jones split down the middle. She's the brains, he's the brawn. Weisz is delightful as the clumsy, bubbly librarian, and Fraser is utterly charming and so cute as the square-jawed adventurer, but stealing every scene he's in is owed. Dead fair as the leader of the secret society, watching over him Hotep with his strong, beautiful face, flowing black robes if of mystical knowledge and penchant for self-sacrifice. He's like a sexy Obi-Wan Kenobi. Fair as an actor to keep an eye on the 1999 release of The Mummy, directed by Sommers, is yet another installment in the mummy genre, following Boris Karloff's famous 1932 version, The Mummy. The 1999 film stars protagonist Rick O'Neill, Brendan Fraser, as the maverick street smart adventurer Evelyn Carnahan, Rachel Weisz, a book's smart scholar, and Hotep Arnold Vosloo, the film's antagonist, set in the earlier parts of the 20th century. The film centers around reawakening a mummy. What else cursed in antiquity? How does this movie rate in historical accuracy? Did the figure Imhotep actually exist? The film opens with a grand panoramic view of the pyramids in Giza, featuring the Sphinx under construction, except we're not a Giza. Instead, the narrator tells us we're in Thebes, city of the living several hundred of kilometers to the south. The time is the 19th dynasty, during the reign of the pharaoh SI 1294 to 1279 BC. Saith the famous Father Ramesses II is often regarded as one of Egypt's most powerful kings. The wealth and monumentality of Egypt comes out strong in the grandeur of the royal palace, located next to the pyramids. In contrast, we think of the pyramids now as the apex of a large area complex, so palaces would not have been located in proximity. One Imhotep, the pharaoh's high priest, meets Anksun, mistress of the pharaoh. The narrator declares the illicit love they have for each other, a love which later compels Imhotep to bring her alive again. There was actually a person by the name of Imhotep who lived in the 3rd dynasty, c. 2667 to 2648 BC. He was Pharaoh Djoser's chief architect. The name Anksunmun comes from Insesamun, who was the wife of Tutankhamun from the 18th dynasty, late 14th century BC. Interestingly, both Imhotep and Anksunmun are also central to Cheops. 1932. The Mummy, considered the chief architect behind Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara. Imhotep was deified in later times and became popular as a healer. A small statue shows him in a seated position with a scroll in his hand. Tamik period photo. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, considered the chief architect behind Djoser's step pyramid at Saqqara. Imhotep was deified in later times and became popular as a healer. Small statue shows him in a seated position with a scroll in his hand. Talmud period 10.13013. Photo. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Anksun wears a scanty fishnet dress upon her golden body, and an ornately decorated petrol is visible below her neck. We know of similar examples, such as the petrol of Princess Siddhartha, runic and covered from her tomb. Hint the inclusion of gold and many precious stones, such as lapis lazuli and turquoise, testify to its importance and high quality. The pectoral and cinnabar suggests a cartu encircling the name of a king in the center, flanked by 2 falcons. And ornate petrol from the tomb of Sith had her runic. A princess in the time of Sennacherib houses similar scenes above below the cartu. Enclosing Sinoit II's throne name, a male figure holds up 2 palm ribs in Egyptian writing. A palm rib signifies year, and together with the male figure, these symbolize millions of years. 12th dynasty from Leyhin 16.1.3 AB. Photo. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. The pectoral Anksunmun suggests a car encircling the name of a king in the center, flanked by 2 falcons. An ornate pectoral from the tomb of Sith Hathor, the runic princess in the time of Sennacherib II, shows a similar scene. See above. Below the cartu enclosing Sennacherib II's throne name, a male figure holds up 2 palm ribs in Egyptian writing. A palm rib signifies year, and together with the male figure, these symbolize millions of years. 12th dynasty. From Leyhin 16.1.3 AB. Photo. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. After murdering Imhotep, and his followers run away. Anksunmun, meanwhile, decides to end her life. Rather than face the consequences of her actions, shortly after, Imhotep attempts to bring Anksun back to life and brings her remains to Hamitrather. He begins the process to resurrect her, so they can live again together in 1 Sinu C5 jars containing her various organs. These are cupic jars, which became an important element in Egyptian burials after the Middle Kingdom. Ancient Egyptians, contrary to the film, only used 4 jars. So each jar would have contained one organ, and one of the 4 sons of Horus would protect each jar. Egyptians would not have removed the heart from the body. After all, they believed the heart to be the seat of the mind. Canopic jars represent the 4 sons of Horus, who protect the organs of the deceased from left to right. Kabi snuff looks after the intestines, Samidity after the liver, HP after the lungs, and Dumitude after the stomach. 25th Dynasty from Thieves Photo Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. 28.38 at the mummy labels Heman Ras, the city of the dead. And as the burial place of the pharaohs, did Hamunaptur really exist? Unfortunately, this is a fictional city, as the name did not exist in ancient Egypt. Furthermore, City of the Dead must refer to the Valley of the Kings and the memorial temples on the Theban West Bank as a consequence to attempting to bring Angsan back to life. Imhotep receives one of the highest forms of punishment, the Hamdai, while his followers are wrapped, then mummified alive. Imhotep's fate is much more cruel. The priests tie him up forcefully, then proceed to cut off his tongue. Next, they place his wrapped body into a coffin, and then a priest with the head of Anubis proceeds to toss scarab beetles into it. While the priests then place the lid on top, the scarab beetles begin to ravage and consume Imhotep. The idea of being buried alive sounds extreme. Nevertheless, Urari texts of the New Kingdom reveal to us numerous instances of brutal punishment for those who don't make it to the afterlife. For example, the mythical creature Amit devour all those who do not pass the famous judgment in the Hall of Two Truth. 2 in spell 43 of the Book of Coming Forth by Day Anist ends before 3 deities, hoping to avoid decapitation by reciting a spell. I am a great one, the son of a great one. I am a flame, the son of a flame, to whom was given his head, after it had been cut off the head of Osiris, shall not be taken from him, and my head shall not be taken from my knit together just and young. For indeed am Osiris, the Lord of Eternity. 3 spell 43 in the Book of Vat. Coming Forth by Day shows the deceased on the right. They address 3 deities in hopes not to have their head cut off. Papyrus of Ani, 18th Dynasty, British Museum, A10470/17. Spell 43 in the Book of Coming Forth by Day shows the deceased on the right. They address 3 deities in hopes not to have their head cut off. Papyrus of Ani, 18th Dynasty, British Museum, A147/10. Capital punishment by burning has also been depicted in ancient Egypt, on top of scenes of decapitated bodies. Ancient Arari texts also contain scenes of bodies burned in raging fires. The horror that we see in Imhotep's eyes and those around him suffering a similar fate surely has parallels in Egyptian Arari texts. Although sensational, the Hamdai ritual as shown in the film is completely fictional. Throughout the film, Egyptian objects housed in museums and similar institutions exist, frequently only for the viewing enjoyment of Western audiences. The mummy ignores their original purpose of aiding the deceased to get to and maintain their existence in the afterlife, as seen within the Museum of Antiquities in Cairo. Shows Evelyn exploring a room filled with all sorts of Egyptian antiquities. She approaches a sarcophagus, and suddenly a mummified, partially wrapped body sits up, scaring Harriet's out to be her brother Jonathan playing a prank. Her as she cautions him the use of the deceased body here is at once familiar to Western audiences. Foral mummies generally imply scary and horror-inducing moments. The body has no agency, as it is simply a prop, which Jonathan uses to prank his sister throughout the film. Egyptian objects exist as motivation for collecting and the acquisition of wealth. Stereotypical elements such as fake doors and elaborate mechanisms exist to keep robbers at bay from glorious riches later within the underground chambers and corridors. Rick and Jonathan are frantically looking for the Book of Ammonius read a counter the spells from the Book of the Dead. In the process, they rip open a stone panel on the base of a statue, callously yanking out what's inside. Modern Egyptians in the film don't often enjoy a positive light. As Evelyn makes her way to the prison to free Rick, she has to haggle for Rick's release with a corrupt Egyptian prison warden. Omid Jalil greedily accepts Evelyn's proposition of getting 25% of the treasure and frees Rick. Then, when the group finally arrives at Hamina Prath, the power of the wealth of treasures nearby overcomes him. Finding several scarabs affixed to a wall, he carelessly hacks out several to keep for himself. It does not take long for one scarab to come alive and bear itself into his brain, killing him in similar fashion. The Egyptian laborers whom the Americans charge with opening a sarcophagus at Himapra are easily dispensable. Dr. Alan Chamberlain, Jonathan Hyde, the Americans' guide, tells them, said he was no fool. I think perhaps we should let the diggers open it. The Egyptians do so, and a cloud of dust quickly consumes them. Perhaps that scene is a nod to the cloud of hot air that met Howard Carter when he had the tomb of Tutankhamun opened. Unfortunately, ethnic Egyptian actors are not represented in any of the major roles of the film. Indian-American actor Erica Ver plays Dr. Terence Bey, the chief curator at the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities in Cairo. Rick's main rival Benny Gabber. American actor Kevin J. O'Connor speaks Hungarian regularly, but communicates with Imhotep in Hebrew. Israeli actor Ode Fair plays Ardith Bey, the leader of the Medja group tasked with preventing Imhotep from resurrecting. Even Imhotep South African-American actor Arnold Vosloo nor Anksun Venezuelan actress Patricia Velasquez are not played by Egyptian actors. The film may be over 20 years old today, but this lack of Egyptian representation is regrettable. The film presents Ardith Bey and the Medjay as men skilled in combat and wholly devoted to preventing the return of Imhotep. Their inclusion in the film is a nod to a similarly named group of people we know as the Medj. We can detect the Medj in the archaeological record from the Middle Kingdom to the early New Kingdom. We know them from textual sources from as early as the late Old Kingdom that they may have worked as mercenaries for the Egyptians. However, by the time of the New Kingdom, the Med are a sort of security group in charge of protecting the royal tombs on the West Bank in the beginning of the Mummy. Pharaoh's bodyguards are labeled as the Medjay. Several hieroglyphs are visible on Ardith Ba's face. His forehead resembles the name Imhotep, though written in an errant way. The word for Mahat, which translates as perfection, custom, or justice, may be written in a cursive manner on either of his cheeks. These phrases match the ancient Egyptian spoken by Imhotep and his followers throughout the film, a nod to the consulting work of Egyptologist Stuart Tyson Smith. This film directed by Stephen Sommers. Screenplay by Stephen Sommers, Lloyd, Fonvielle, Kevin Jarre, produced by Tim Shah, Daniel starring Brendan Fraser, Rachel Weisz, John Hannah, Arnold, Vosloo, Jonathan Hyde, Kevin J. O'Connor, cinematography, Adrian Bid, edited by Bob Duque, music by Jerry Goldsmith, production company, Alphaville Films, distributed by Universal Pictures, release date May 7th, 1999 in United States, running time 125 minutes, country United States, languages, English. Egyptian budget, $80 million, box office, 418.1. About it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.